Hey guys, Beth here at Yogalates London. Thank you so much for joining me for this short video. So this video series is aimed at yoga teachers to really help give you an idea of what to expect from my teacher training program. So as you may know, I run a 60-hour CPD online training for yoga teachers to help them bring more strength and stability work into their classes, but also resistance training, Pilates exercises, lots of different approaches to helping offer your students a little bit more of a functional movement approach and really supporting them in the long term with their health and mobility. So I thought what we could talk about today is the gluteus maximus. This is one muscle of the glute complex. It's tricky, this term, the glutes, I think, because it can be a bit of a blanket term for a group of muscles that have lots of different functions. So if we're looking at, say, the glute medius on the side here, it's an abductor muscle, helps to abduct the leg, very different from the glute maximus at the back, so which has different functions, which we'll talk about in a sec. But glute stability is really important, especially in the yoga community. You know, I often go to yoga classes and I see a lot of students hanging into their lower backs, ribs coming forward, that slight anterior pelvic tilt of the pelvis. And a lot of that is to do with core stability, certainly the abdominals not firing up as they should, which we'll talk about in a later video, but also the gluteus maximus, which is an important hip extensor and helps to bring that sort of slightly more tucked position of the pelvis. So if this muscle is weak, it can contribute to that overarch lumbar, which we can often see in the yoga community. And you see it in back bends a lot of the time, people sort of overarching the lumbar, not actually recruiting the glutes in the way that they need to be to support the back health, but also the SI joint stability as well. We can have a lot of issues in the yoga community with SI joint dysfunction. It can be a little bit too mobile, and this again ties into the glutes. So if the glutes aren't firing up as they should, it can lead to a lot of instability problems and pain and injury. We'll talk about the gluteus medius another time, so this important hip abductor, but I really do just want to focus on hip extension today. So let's look at the Pilates bridge versus the yoga bridge, because I think this shows you a little bit about the gluteus maximus. But before we do, I just want to explain a little bit about the anatomy of the gluteus maximus. So we think about it as one muscle, and it is indeed one muscle, but it has a couple of different functions. So the upper part of the gluteus maximus, this part here, has diagonal fibers, which mean it has a big role in hip external rotation, and it can be quite chronically tight, the upper part. You can see that with people who stand up and their feet are slightly turned out. I mean, the gluteus maximus, as we know, isn't the only hip external rotator, and again, we'll talk about that later. But it's an important one, and if it's chronically tight, we can often have a lot of sort of problems here, and also a lot of compression for the upper part of the glutes, and that can go into the pelvis as well and affect the pelvis. And now the lower part of the glute max is a hip extensor. So it takes the leg back behind you, and this is the part of the muscle that I want to talk about, because often when we're in back bends, we don't effectively recruit this part of the muscle. And yeah, this can lead to, as I said, a lot of problems. So let's get on the mat. Okay, so coming down onto your back for bridge, we're going to have the knees bent, feet about a foot to a foot and a half away from the bottom. And then we'll come up into a yoga bridge first of all. So lifting the hips, coming up just as you usually would, finding this arching of the lower back, slightly lifting up, finding openness all along the front body, maybe taking hands underneath, scooching the shoulders under and lifting. And it's really more of a back bend, as you probably feel, right? So there's nothing wrong with that. It's all about the intention of the pose or exercise. So if we come down and come into a Pilates bridge, the intention shifts. So instead of a back bend, what we want to be focusing on is the kind of length of the tailbone. So as we come into a slight posterior pelvic tilt, we lengthen the tailbone, imprinting the lower back and peeling the spine one vertebra at a time. Hopefully you can see that they're coming up away from the floor. And the emphasis is not so much on arching the lower back, but actually maintaining the length in that area. Slightly tilting the tailbone so that the tailbone sort of heading towards the knees. And as you can see, rather than a back bend, it's more of a ski slope position. So my hip flexors have to get a little bit of a stretch there, and the arms coming down. And then that's quite strong enough as it is. You can place the hands down to the lower part of the glute max, and hopefully you feel those muscles switching on with this slight posterior pelvic tilt. And we have the upper part, we're trying to soften that really. So if you feel the difference between the upper part of the glute max trying to soften and the lower part switching on. And then you can kind of add on lots of different variations to make the glutes work harder. So you can do foot lifts one at a time, trying to maintain the height of the hips as you do so. You can lift the leg up and then add on kind of even coming down and up with the legs. There's lots of different variations that I play with in my classes. And then, doing the same on the other side. So leg coming up and down and up and down. And then you can even sort of draw it in and then press it away. Lots of different ways we can kind of really tire out those glutes and get that glute maximus, the lower part, switched on. So then slowly rolling down, I'm just going to draw the knees into the chest one at a time. So I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea of the difference between a yoga and a Pilates bridge. So another exercise that you can practice to recruit this often underutilized lower part of the gluteus maximus is one in standing that I'm going to show you in a second. But before we cover that, I just wanted to make this point about the gluteus maximus and the lower part of it as a hip extensor. So taking the leg back behind the body, it's most effectively recruited coming from hip flexion to hip extension. So rather than extension to flexion, right? And that makes sense if you sort of feel that it does sort of switch on as we're coming back with the leg. And so in bridge, as we come up into the bridge pose, we're coming from hip flexion with the bottom down on the floor, coming up into hip extension. And that's where the recruitment happens of the muscles. So coming to the front of your mat, I just wanted to show you this standing sequence, as I call it, the high lunge flow, to really recruit the whole glute complex. It's a really powerful exercise. So hands on the hips, taking the weight onto the right leg. You're going to bring the left leg up. And as you can see, my lifted leg is in hip flexion, and my standing leg is in hip extension. So starting to hinge forward at the hips, leaning the body weight forward, bending the standing leg knee. I'm going to take this leg back behind me, and I feel the glutes switching on as I come into hip extension there. Coming onto the ball of the back foot, coming up with the body. And then reversing that. So coming forward with the body, taking the weight onto this front foot again, feeling the glutes on this standing leg, really working hard. So the whole, all the glutes working here, standing leg and lifted leg as well. So starting to bend the knee, hinging forward, really slowing it down. The slower you go with these exercises, the more we're recruiting these smaller stabilizing muscles, and the more the glutes really have to fire up, have a chance to switch on. Coming up. Now you can also do it with a prop, make it a little bit more challenging. So I'm going to use a Pilates ball, but you can use a cushion if you don't have one, or a block. And we're going to have it in front, and we're going to squeeze the prop with the hands. So we're switching on the shoulder girdle as well. Taking the weight onto the left leg this time, taking the right leg up into that hip flexion, and starting to bend the standing leg knee as we shift forward, and taking our time, stepping back. This can be challenging, taking your time with it. Onto the ball of the foot, maybe the arms coming up, feeling that lovely shoulder engagement. And then coming forward on the exhale. Coming up, breathing as feels natural for you. And then we'll do that again one more time. Bending to the standing leg, reaching forward, stepping back with the foot, really feeling the glutes switching on in the standing leg. Coming up. And then shifting forward again. Taking your time. Don't use momentum if you can help it. Coming up, and then bring the foot down. And there you have it. So yeah, if you're interested in working more with me, my teacher training program is now open for registrations. And head to my website to learn more about that, yogalatesLondon.com. I'll be adding more videos in this series, so stay tuned for that. And if you've got any questions at all about this or working with me, just message me or pop a comment. I'd love to hear from you. Take good care. Bye.